Okay, so being together with all these couples reminds me of a story I heard. So it goes like this. All of these married couples died and went to heaven. And I can't verify all the facts, but I believe this is how it went. They all come forward, and God the Father looks out. I'm running in here. Gave me a little extra. There's a little anticipation with this joke now. So, all right, so God the Father says, okay, looking at all these married couples, he says, we're going to have an orderly procession into heaven today. I would like all the men who have been the spiritual heads of their households to line up here in this first line. All the men who have been henpecked and dominated by their wives all their lives to line up here in the second line. And all the women to go see St. Peter, because they'll have easy access into heaven. And as these lines are being formed, God the Father looks out, and there's one lone man in that first line who have been the spiritual head and leader of their household. And the line for the men who have been henpecked and dominated by their wives wrapped around the corner, and it was long. And so God looks out and he says, my sons, I've challenged you. I've given you the grace to be leaders, spiritual leaders in your home. But learn from this man. Learn from him. And he turns to the one man and he says, my son, how did you come to be in this line? He looks up kind of sheepishly at God and says, I don't know. My wife just told me to stand here. So no matter why you're here today, we've in the past, we'd have this little survey thing we do like electronically. We'd say, what's the number one reason? Why did you come today? And some people, it's like, my priest told me to come. I saw it in the bulletin or this. But the number one reason was my wife. So no, but no matter why you're here, we really are glad you're here. And we do want to focus in this talk on making marriage the foundation of your family.
And the one thing that we found with a lot of parents, once you have children, especially when they're little, children tend to dominate a lot of your time and your energy and your resources and a lot of the things that you talk about in your marriage. But what we want to emphasize today is that the grace to be a parent comes from the sacrament of matrimony, right? The sacrament of marriage. That's where you get the grace to be a parent. So if you want to be a great parent, you really need to be an amazing spouse. And so we want to just talk to you a little bit about that and to realize that your family began on your wedding day. Your family did not begin the day your first child was born. When you were standing on the altar and you pledged your life to that other person, you are then a family. That is when you become a family. And that marriage needs to continue to be the primary relationship within the home. I remember I have 10 children, but I also come from a family of 10 children. I'm the second oldest of 10 children. And I remember my father would say to us all the time, he was like, I need to protect this woman from you children. He was like, 18 years from now, you'll all be gone, and I'm just going to have her, But it was, he would say it in a funny way, but the truth is that, yeah, eventually the children do leave. But your marriage throughout your entire raising of your children is always that foundation of the family. And this is the difference between trying to kind of go back to that frantic and fruitful. A frantic family is a family that is looking at the urgent all the time. And the needs of children are always urgent, aren't they, right? They're sometimes literally screaming right in front of you, right? Children's needs are always urgent. But you know what is never urgent? Your marriage. Your marriage only becomes urgent when someone says, I want a divorce. Then all of a sudden marriage is urgent. But your marriage is always important. It is always important. And taking time to live intentionally and focusing on that most important relationship within the home, that is really that first step to being a fruitful family. And just to kind of give that illustration here, sorry, I'm skipping through here too fast. To remember, even throughout your day, that you were a bride before you were a mother. Right? You were a groom before you were a husband. And if you want to do this like little exercise here, if you want to just think about, I know I thought there was a touch screen. If you want to think about your wedding day. Okay? Think about yourself on your wedding day. And husbands, you just think about your wife, right? Everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. Your hair is perfect. Nails are perfect. You know, like you've just beautiful. This is the day that you became a bride. This is that first identity. Now I want you to think about the day that you became a mother, right? It's very different. It's very, very different. So do you want to think of yourself first as a bride, right? Or as a mother? I lived with this family once who they had 8 children, and the husband always referred to his bride. That's okay. He always referred to his wife, the mother of his children, as his bride, right? This is his bride. And that's the way that we need to think about ourselves.
So marriage is good for people, okay? God knew what he was doing. And here are some statistics that we just want to talk about, because sometimes we think that grass is always greener on the other side. This is to just point out that people do better in marriage. Okay, so married men earn up to 26% more than their unmarried counterparts. So thank you for the raise, right? This is why this isn't why we do it, but there's just some naturally following consequences here of being married. And that statistic holds true even among the poor and even among DNA, identical twins, those married versus unmarried. There's something about marriage that influences you. Second statistic here, married men have lower levels of stress. Usually we get a little bit of response on that one.
That always happens.
I know. But it's statistically true.
Think about how stressed out all those other guys are.
I know. So if you feel it, then think about the other guys, right? Women in intact marriages have substantially more money to take care of their family's needs than women in any other structure, any other family structure out there. Married people are happier in their relationships and report less depression than those who cohabitate. And again, this is becoming more and more common. Just because you live together doesn't make you happy. And our world seems to forget this. Married people are more likely to report better health. And again, this difference holds true with the poor. So even poor who are married are reporting better physical health and mental health than their unmarried counterparts. And this is the one that I want to just make sure we'll get back to this more specifically. But married men and women report the most enjoyable and the most frequent sexual encounters.
With each other. Just to be clear.
Hey, we have the lights on now. Is there a spotlight? But okay, so here's the difference here too. Okay, so if you go out and you watch like an episode of Friends or whatever, you think all these people are having more sex who are not married. That's just statistically not happening. And so it's a lie of the world. But those who report the most enjoyable sexual relations are those who are the most religiously active. Isn't that pretty cool? All right. So if you want great sex, go to church. Okay. And we will get into this topic later, because what's a Catholic conversation on marriage without talking about sex? But we'll save that. We'll set you up for that later. A number of years ago, there was a summer thunderstorm in our house. And our son was about 5 years old. And Alicia was tucking him into bed because he was a little scared. And he said to her, "Mommy, can I sleep in your bed tonight?" And she said, "No, honey, you have to sleep in your own bed." And then he says, "Mommy, why not? Why can't I sit there?" "Well, Daddy and I are sleeping in the bed in our room tonight." And she says, "The big sissy." And I'm not sure I like the way he got that, but he knew that mommy's and daddy's relationship was the priority, right? That we put our marriage first, that even though we love our kids and they want them to be safe, there is something important about our kids knowing that our marriage comes first. And our kids are the fruit of our love. They were born from our love, and they need to be nourished by our love. Alicia said this earlier, but if you want to be a great parent, you need to be an amazing spouse. If you want to be a great parent, you need to be an amazing spouse. The love that is exchanged between husband and wife is so powerful, so potent, that in 9 months you have to give it a name. Like there's something just beautiful, right, about that, right? Yes? Okay. Right, because they started from this and they really do need to be nourished and sustained by that. There is something that all of our kids need, that fixed, sure place in their crazy world, and that sure place is your marriage. They need to bask in the glow of your couple love. Now, I mentioned earlier that I come from a divorced family. I had dealt with some of the challenges I had with my dad's alcoholism and all these other things. But I don't think I even realized that I missed out on the couple love between my mom and dad. It wasn't just the notion that, oh, this is what marriage looks like, which is true, but I missed out on the love that would radiate from that marriage. That's what we need. That's what your kids need in their home. Because neither parent alone can fully image God's love to our kids. And only together can we show that. I remember my dad, actually, when we were getting married, he pulled me aside and he said, you need to make sure you always put your spouse first, because I didn't. And coming from him, that was just a powerful moment. And we need to make sure that we look at our kids and say, this one, this woman, this man, your husband, your wife, they are first, and our kids need to know it. And really on a simple practical level, what we're talking about here and making a priority is, can we make time? Can we invest in our relationship, right? These regular connections. And I really believe, when we talk about men leading in the household, I believe this is one of the areas, spiritually, but also in leading in pursuing your spouse, pursuing your bride, making sure she is reminded of that constantly. I have this image of me chasing my wife and her chasing the kids, and then when I catch up to her, we have more kids, and it keeps spiraling out. But there is something innate in women, particularly, who expend themselves for their kids. They just lay it all out. They give themselves. They just pour themselves out. And I believe that part of our job, again, this is true for both husband and wife, but I think particularly men need to remind her that she is your bride first, that before she's mommy, before she is whatever, whatever title you want to put in there, right? That we need to protect, as Alicia talked about her dad, protect your wife and many times from the kids. They're wonderful, lovely, and distracting so many times too. But the number one recommendation, so as I came from a divorced family, I was looking for, what does a real marriage look like? Because I know, deep in my bones, I knew that what I experienced growing up wasn't a real marriage. And so I kept looking for it in my friends' families. I would do some couch surfing, try to figure out, okay, is this one worth modeling and following after? And we still kind of ask couples to this day, what do you do? And they all say the same thing in different words, but it's about connection. It's about date nights. And that's daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. Daily, you need to check in. You need to know what's going on. And I traveled a lot for work, and I didn't always do this so well. We need to check in with our spouses on a regular basis. One of our Alicia's brother says that it's coffee and wine, beginning the day together and maybe ending the day together with coffee and wine. Some people in the early days, they could, I remember early, we'd actually have lunch together because it seemed like that was the only time we could fit it in while the kids were in school or early on in our marriage. We have friends who, and we've done this, I guess, at times too, where the kids are not allowed out of their bedroom before mom and dad have a little time to kind of get themselves together in the morning. Some people put a baby gate up in front of the door to keep them in. I don't know if that's fire code. I don't know if that's... But then we've talked about this, and I guess in the last FFI event that you were at, but date nights. You need weekly, and at the very least, monthly. We're in ministry, we serve, so we actually made a commitment to weekly date nights, and we put it on our calendar every Wednesday night. And if it's not Wednesday night, we readjust that week so that we make sure we don't miss out, because you need to know each other. And you can't do that without investing time. When our kids were little, it was tough. And so sometimes we would just make sure to get them to bed on a reasonable time so we could have time together. There was a comment here, you have siblings, you have families, you have Brian and Joanna who will watch your kids apparently, I guess. But trading off with other couples, whatever it might be. But then, so you've got the daily connection, you've got the weekly or monthly date nights, and then annually, you need to get away. You need to take time for at least one night, if not 2 nights, if not a long weekend, where you just get away and remember who each other are in the midst of the busyness of our frantic lives.
And I want to just note, too, that this is still important, whether you have children in the home or not. We work together. We're together all the time. So you would think, and that's why actually we kind of had let our date nights fall to the wayside, because we were like, well, we talk all day long. But that's not the same as spending time together, not as business partners, right? Or as co-founders or podcast hosts, but just spending time together as husband and wife. So just keep that in mind, that these are important to be intentional about, even if you're together all day long without any children within the home. So another point that we want to emphasize to you for making your marriage the foundation of your family, keeping that love alive, is striving for unity. Okay, striving for unity. We say that unity is kind of like the X factor in a marriage that makes all the difference. If you have unity in a home, there is nothing that life throws at you that you won't be able to handle. But we've seen couples in perfect financial and life situations whose marriages fall apart because they don't have that unity. But without unity, none of the problems can really effectively be solved, whether it's parenting or finances or work or whatever. So forging unity is something that really takes time. I remember in our first 5 years of marriage, they say that first 5 or 7 years is the most difficult time in your marriage. And I think that is very difficult, because I think you're learning about your differences, and you're learning how to work together. And you're learning how different you are, right? You have to recognize, you come from 2 different families of origin. You have 2 different personalities types. People will be like, oh, well, they're this personality, I'm that personality, so our marriage is difficult. And it's like, no, your marriage is a great blessing that you're different. Because you know what the biggest difference is between you and your spouse? What's the biggest difference? You're a man and a woman. That's bigger than any personality.
We still believe in that, just to put that out there.
Yes, okay. Exactly. But those differences are actually a great blessing, because if you think about your marriage, not like 2 pieces of cloth that's being sewn together, but think of your marriage, it's like 2 pieces of metal that are being melted down and forged together to create something completely new. Okay, that's the kind of unity that we're talking about. And I know that it's easy for me to say that, and I do want to hold that vision out for you. But I also understand that melting down of that metal sometimes is not a pleasant process to go through, right? Because sometimes the situation with our spouse or the answer to their problem, you may feel like is so obvious and it's frustrating that your spouse can't see it. This is called having a different perspective, But what do you do? What do you do? And couples come to us all the time and ask that. Like, what do you do when there's a situation in our family, in our life, and we just have 2 diametrically opposed opinions about what we should do going up to it. And I just want to share a little story with you about what you should do. So the podcast this January will be 10 years old. If you can believe that. I can't even believe we've been doing this for 10 years. It feels like yesterday. But when we started the podcast, and before we were really in full-time ministry, I was on the board. I had founded a homeschooling co-op that became a Montessori school. And I was on the board, and then I was directing that. And it really wasn't that the school was a labor of love. It wasn't really making us any money or anything. But it was really something I felt so strongly about. But meanwhile, we're doing the podcast, and finances are really tight. So then I picked up another part-time job, and it was just a very, very stressful situation for me, because I was very busy. I was homeschooling kids, I had kids at home, all of that. And Mike, when I was sharing with him how stressed out I was, his solution, very practical solution, he was like, okay, let's look at all the things you're doing. This thing over here is not bringing in any money, and it's causing the most stress, so you should step down from directing this school, right? So you should let go of that. And I was not hearing that. That was not, because this was very, very important to me. And so what happened when he insisted on his way, he moved from being a problem solver to being an adversary, okay? Because of where I was at, and he was saying, hey, this is what you should do. It became very adversarial relationship, and that wasn't good for us. So instead of staying in that place, Mike decided to come into my crazy, and he actually came on the board of the school with me and took over the finances. And the school continued to grow. And then, to make a long story short, eventually things did get to a breaking point, and I did step down. So in the end, obviously he was right, that's what I should have done.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Adam, is the recording on this?
So yes, he was right. But what is important, the point here, is that Mike chose unity over being right. Okay, so that brings us to this a principle that we teach a lot, which is better to be wrong together than right alone. And of course, you understand this doesn't mean morally, of course, because morally wrong is wrong. But when you look at what is the best financial plan, what is the best plan for this child, what is the best, ways that we should spend the holidays, whatever you do, even if you think you are right, it is better that you are together and that you have an imperfect plan than you insist on your way, which you believe is right, and you're in disunity with your spouse. You see, because when we would talk about it, if he was focused on being right and proving his point, that's not what he would be doing. In the end, he was looking at it from my perspective. He was coming and stepping into my shoes. So when the time came for me to step down, it was something that I knew he understood. He understood where I was coming from. And then he didn't say I was right. He didn't say that, even though he was. But the point is that he could have more compassion and understand where I was coming from. And so when the time comes, you really need to do it together, and there's no looking back. And which brings us to a second principle that we have, which is mutual decision, mutual responsibility. So when he came on the board, right, and we decided to do this, when I stepped down, he couldn't have said at that point, well, see, this is what I told you to do all along. But we mutually decided that I would remain on the board and that he would be on with me. And so whatever stress that came with that, we were going to carry that together because we decided it together, okay? And so then when we stepped off, we could do it together. So when you make a decision together, you take responsibility for it together. And just recognize that, so if you make a choice about a discipline plan and then it blows up, right? Or you make a financial decision that doesn't turn out the way you wanted, you can't go to your spouse and say, well, I never thought this would work, right? Because you make the decision together, you take responsibility for it together. And that unity impacts your children and really those around you who are watching your marriage, as you are that image of God's love for humanity, right? That is impacting people more than anything else. It gives our children that stability and that love and that belonging, that place of belonging that they really need.
One of the most important tools, vital tools in forging unity in your marriage is forgiveness. Now, just to add another little story here, early in our marriage, I was an exemplary husband. My wife was going upstairs to put the kids to bed, and she asked me to clean up the living room. And it was strewn with toys all over the place, right? And I thought, I got this. I'm a man. I know how to do this.
This is not plugged.
What's the matter?
This isn't plugged in, and I don't know where Adam is. Can you plug this in?
There is no cord. Let's see. Well, let's move it closer to...
Because our PowerPoint's going to die here. Is there a plug anywhere?
No. We're going to move it up there. There's one up by the projector. Let's just move it closer to that.
Okay.
Sorry. Here, I'll tell the story while they're cleaning this up. All right, so just keep that plugged in, obviously. Sorry, technical difficulties, please stand by. All right, so I, as the really amazing husband that I was, I looked at the floor and saw all the Lincoln Logs and the Legos and the little superhero characters, and I scooped them all up and started dumping them into various bins that were around the room. And I thought, I am so good. Look at the floor. There's nothing on the floor. I thought, man, she is so lucky to have me.
So ladies, you know what those bins were, right? Were they various bins around the floor? No, I know, you were nodding, right?
Check the box, it's
on
done.
These bins, I not only had labels, but they were made for my toddlers. And so I actually had pictures. I actually had pictures of the different things that belonged in the bins, which was not noticed at all.
I was wearing my man goggles at the time. They were not.
There you go, there you go.
And so when Alicia came down, she wasn't so happy with what I had done. And she began to
So I came down and I was like, what did you do? And he was like, I cleaned up. And I was like, did you see the pictures and the bins and blah, blah, blah? I see wives kicking each other's, they're kicking their husbands there. And I said, and this is, I can't actually believe I said this, but I did. I said, well, you either didn't put these bins in the right place out of spite, or you're just stupid.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Well, at this moment, the synapses in my brain fuse together. I see red. She had no idea how disrespectful or how disrespected I felt, right? Those words cut through, and then we became those neighbors. We had Alicia's sister living with us at the time, so we took the argument out to the back porch. Thinking,
I don't know why we thought that was better, but we did.
I don't know. And then I'm surprised the cops weren't called. I mean, we didn't throw anything, but it was loud, and the argument went on and on, right? But we were missing each other. I had no idea how, and one of our love languages is acts of service. So it wasn't just that I just didn't sort out the toys. It was a specific attack, if you will. And then she didn't realize what she had said to me and how that felt. Mm. But the reason I bring this up is that we were at an impasse if we didn't come to forgiveness, because we were not talking. We did not speak the same language at that moment. When we were first married, I had a man who I greatly admire, Alicia's dad, to say it is the man's job to be the first one to ask for forgiveness. And I'm like, gulp. And this is the sign of what it means to be a true man, to have that level of humility, to seek that out. And needless to say, this was a great challenge for me on many occasions. In this one, it was definitely a challenge, but it was really great advice. It was essential for us to have a great marriage, that we begin by forging that unity by seeking forgiveness.
And I can say when Mike takes that first step, when he's an example of laying down his pride for the sake of our marriage, it really convicts me, right, to look at myself and to say, well, what have I done? And it helps us to come to unity more quickly.
Yeah, and it really is a hard thing to admit that I was wrong. What I did was wrong. Do you forgive me? Because we will and we have offended our spouses, and we may have offended them even during lunch today. I don't know. But we're all of us, we're all in need of forgiveness. We're all sinners. We're all stepping on each other's toes. And sometimes those wounds are more than just stepping on toes. But we hurt the ones closest to us. And the reality is that it's not so much how you hurt somebody, but how quickly you repair it. How quickly you move on from that. We have a deep trust between us that's been forged over many years, over many times, both of us coming to each other, seeking for forgiveness, right? But we have a need to both give and receive forgiveness. And this quote is just really, really beautiful, right? Forgiveness is not primarily a feeling. Instead, it is a choice to extend God's merciful love to someone who has hurt you, in obedience to Jesus. The end of our tour story is that we both needed to forgive each other. We both had done something wrong. And after we calmed down, after we could forgive, we could listen to each other. We could understand each other. And it actually made us even more united after the fact. I understood more deeply how to not only sort toys, but what mattered to her, how we can work through this together, how we can communicate more effectively with each other. I did not feel I was ready to forgive her. And I feel like sometimes people have this false notion that I have to be ready to forgive. Excuse me, that's crap. We are Christians. Therefore, I don't care if you're ready to forgive. You forgive. And then I remember this priest telling me one time that you forgive and you forgive and you forgive until it doesn't hurt anymore. That's what we do. This is not, there is no easy button, right? This is where it matters that we are Christians. Because when we withhold forgiveness from someone else, when we withhold that, or when we don't say we're sorry, it's poisoning our marriage, right? And this is how we have to do it. Don't ever let the feelings cloud the judgment of saying, I choose unity. And the way you choose that is by forgiving and seeking forgiveness.
Okay, so the next step after forging unity is grow your intimacy. So your vocation in life, if you think about it, is connected to this one person. That person sitting next to you, it's connected to your spouse. Right? This is your vocation in life. This is the path to holiness that God has called you to. And to be known by them, we need to be vulnerable with them. And really, if you think about it, you are completely naked emotionally and physically with this one person. There's lots of people that you can have emotional intimacy with, maybe a good friend, a brother, or a sister. But there is only one person in the world that you have both emotional and physical intimacy with. And you need to grow in that intimacy over time. It is a process. So this gift of yourself, of your heart and your mind and your body gets deeper and deeper. John Paul II says, love is something that never is, but is always becoming. I mean, John Paul just has such a beautiful way of saying things, right? But it's always becoming. We were just talking to Brian and Joanna over lunch, and we were saying, how about you're never done? You're never done. You may look, if you've been married 10 years, we've been married 30 years, you could be like, oh, we'll never be where they are. Oh, they're so, no, we're still on the journey, believe me. And they were saying the same thing. You're always learning. You're always growing in your relationship. So how do you grow? How do you grow in intimacy? There is only one path to intimacy, and that is vulnerability. Vulnerability, which can be so difficult. If you've ever heard of Brené Brown, she is a research professor that has studied vulnerability, courage, authenticity, and shame. And if you have never heard or seen her TED Talk, she has a 15-minute TED Talk on YouTube that's been viewed millions of times. It is so good, and she just gives some truths for all relationships very, very clearly. But in her research, she asked this question: how do we cultivate the connection that we all need to recognize that we're worthy of love? How do we cultivate connection with others? And that answer is vulnerability. It's allowing yourself to be seen. And that's the only way to have true connection with another person. And that's the gateway to everything that is creative and joyous and good and true in our lives, is really through vulnerability with our spouse, but then, in appropriate ways with other people as well. But why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to be vulnerable? It's so hard because we struggle with our own shame, right? We don't think we are worthy, which is kind of going back to that last talk and the family culture and talking about the spiritual life of your home. This is why you need to be firm in your identity of who you are as a beloved child of the Father, right? You need to be firm in that identity so that that combats that shame of knowing that we're not worthy of love. But we all struggle with that. But we have to move forward. And here's the quote there. Says, when we shut ourselves off from vulnerability, we distance ourselves from the experiences that bring purpose and meaning to our lives. So this is also the key to real, honest communication. That's when we're vulnerable. All right, so another little story. when we had 7 children, way back when, when we had 7 children, Mike worked in Columbus. We live in Steubenville, so Columbus is like 2 hours away. He was working in politics on a gubernatorial campaign. And it was a very high pressure, like 24/7 kind of job. And it just felt like every time I called him, he was like walking into a meeting or in some important conversation or doing something like really great and awesome. And I'm like at home, like trying to take a shower and like go to the bathroom by myself is my big accomplishment for the day, you know? So we're living like 2 very different lifestyles. And I just kind of felt like every time I reached out for connection or reached out for support or whatever, that I was just shut down, you know, and I was just shut down again and again. Every time I made myself vulnerable, I was not received. And I remember driving in the car once and hung up the phone because I was talking to him on the phone, and another time of being shut down, and the thought went through my head, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And I was like, it was like a pail of cold water. I think it was the Holy Spirit, my guardian angel, you know, and I was like, all of a sudden I realized this is where it begins. This is where it begins. People don't wake up one day and be like, you know what? I'm over with this marriage. I want to get divorced. You know, that's not what happens. No, there's a series of small events before that moment that lead you to that moment. And I felt like I was at a crossroads. I was like, this is where I can see before me 2 roads, right? Here's this one road to safety where I can just wall up my heart, and I see where that's leading. But then here's this other road that's really treacherous and unknown and possibly painful, but that's the only way to true connection. What am I going to do? Which way am I going to keep my heart walled up and be safe, quote, safe? Or am I going to choose vulnerability? And so when he came home, you know, that weekend or whatever, I was able to just share with him and just be really honest and say, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm really hurting. You know, I just don't really feel loved by you. I don't feel known by you. And praise God, you know, the Holy Spirit, we're still here, obviously. Mike was able to receive that vulnerability and you just receive it very gently and with honor. And we were able to start rebuilding back, you know, that relationship. And why did I choose that? I think I chose that partially because I'm just really stubborn. And I remember thinking, I will not have a mediocre marriage. Like, I'm not going to be one of those people. If I'm going to be married, we're going to have the greatest marriage ever. Like, that's what our goal is, you know? We're going to do this. And you have to make that choice. And it's not like we had that conversation and then, oh my gosh, everything was great. No, it wasn't. It wasn't great. But it was a choice at that moment to choose to be vulnerable as opposed to being safe. And we could start rebuilding back our relationship and kind of get to that place of true joy.
So, as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about our physical intimacy. Is that okay?
Yes.
No one's uncomfortable? Okay. So we really must be intentional in the growth in our emotional intimacy as well as in our physical intimacy. And I'll start off with something. Has anyone ever heard of the 30-second kiss? Yes, okay. All right, so social science researchers, I don't know who funded this study, okay? But they found out that it wasn't a 20-second kiss, it wasn't a 28-second, it was a 30-second kiss that by that time, and that's a long time. Husbands, try this. Well, I'll give that as homework later. But something physiologically happens, bonding hormones that are released after a 30-second kiss. And it changes those relationships because of that, because we aren't just souls floating around, right? We're a body-soul composite. This is why our physical intimacy matters, right? When I said I do, when she said I do, we gave our hearts, our minds, our lives, our bodies, everything to each other. And what we need to do is make sure that we are intentional about growing in this. And if you incorporate things like a 30-second kiss, every now and then, maybe not every second, maybe not in public. We said it on a podcast, and then we got some complaints from people. It was a parish that was saying, people are making out at church now. That's not part of my recommendation. That's not our plan. And it does have to be voluntary. Both spouses need to agree to this. All right, but Sex is not a leisure time activity that we engage in when all the stars align and all the laundry's done and everything is taken care of. Sex is a sacred communication between two married persons. You know, the church doesn't say that sex is bad, which sometimes the world thinks. The church doesn't even say that sex is good or even great. It says it's sacred, right? This is how we, your church or your marriage isn't consummated in the eyes of the church until it's consummated, right? And this, I believe, is when we engage in marital intimacy, I believe we're renewing our sacrament. I believe we're renewing that sacrament in a beautiful way. And when the church says to frequent the sacraments, maybe that's what she's talking about, frequent. But if you haven't noticed by now, men and women approach sex differently. And maybe that's just us, but that's a little different, right? And women in general need to feel loved, to feel cherished, to feel safe before they can move to the bedroom. They need to be romanced. They need to have their hearts open. They need to make sure that they're in the right context, right? And that culminates in the marital embrace. Men in general don't need all those same things before going to the bedroom. Am I right? Is that okay? I got enough thumbs up for the men. All right. But it's in the bedroom, it's in that marital embrace that men feel loved. So women need to feel that love beforehand to culminate in the marital embrace. And men feel that intimacy and that love in the marital embrace. And in the two, we have the perfect, because we need both of those aspects of our physical intimacy, right? We need that romancing. We need to have that as part of our lives. We need to lay down our lives in emotional intimacy as well as physical intimacy. And there is this wonderful, wonderful design of God that made both of us different, but complementary. But in that difference, it can become a problem. There is something called the desire discrepancy, that the person who has the greater need or the greater desire is actually in the weaker position. So as an example, if the woman is reaching out for emotional intimacy, she is actually in the weaker position. Likewise, the man, if he's reaching out for physical intimacy, is really in a weaker position. And the other could lord it over and withhold that sort of intimacy from the other. But that's not what God calls for, right? That's not weaponizing the vulnerability and the weakness of our spouse. It's something more that we are called to. We are called to both have this emotional and physical connection. And when we recognize that, when we see that we need love, we need vulnerability, we need intimacy, the only proper answer to the desire discrepancy is joyful availability, saying, I will make myself available to my spouse for emotional and physical intimacy because this is a beautiful expression of our lives. And there really is this great danger in our world, when a world that is seeking the comforts and pleasures and everything that we close our hearts off to our spouses, and that we, as Alicia said, wall off ourselves. And this is do I have that quote? No. But this danger, when we only seek pleasure and comfort and not the intimacy that is desired in our hearts by laying down our lives and giving of ourselves in true love.
And I really do want to emphasize the giftedness of men and women for intimacy, because women, we are naturally gifted in general with the skills and the desire and the drive for relational, emotional intimacy, which men need. Men need that. They need you to pursue them for that emotional intimacy. And men, in their giftedness, have that desire for physical intimacy, which women need as well. And so we need to honor the way that we have been created and the desires, the beautiful drives that God has given each one of us, because both of you need both of those things. Right? And so we need to look at each other in those differences and say, how can I be open to the pursuit of my spouse, whether it's for emotional or physical intimacy? So sometimes, like, when I'd be really tired at the end of the day, and Mike would be like, hey, tonight, like, what do you think? And that being joyfully available.
That's exactly what I said.
I don't know how to describe what he would say.
That's okay.
Like, hey,
they get the idea.
I don't
wink,
know.
wink, nudge, nudge.
You get it.
Yeah.
But maybe it's like kick under the table. I don't know. But in those moments, a great way or example of being joyfully available is saying, you know what? I'm going to be honest. That's not where I am right now, like in this context, but I'm open to being convinced, right? So I'm open to the pursuit. Maybe not even I'm open to sex right at this moment because we're in the midst of giving the kids dinner, but I am open. But I'm open to being pursued and giving that smile and that softness back. So as I mentioned before, when Mike was, when he was in the campaign and we were having this difficulty in our relationship, I don't know where I got this idea from, but when the campaign was over and he came home, I sat him down and I was like, look, I have this idea of the two of us doing some marriage therapy. And he was like, sure, yes, I'll do whatever you say, whatever you think is best. And I said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make love every night until our relationship gets better. And
okay.
I took some convincing, but it really did help. I mean, honestly, it really did help, because it's not everything, because we need that emotional intimacy that I was pursuing him for before we had that talk. But then I recognize you also need that physical intimacy, because that is where the grace of God can come into our marriage through renewing our sacrament.
And our final point here is that as a married couple, we need to go on mission together. This is a beautiful quote. Are people familiar with Dietrich Bonhoeffer? He wrote he wrote a lot of things, but he was he was in a prisoner of war camp with the Nazis. He instigated against the Nazis as a Lutheran pastor. When he was in a Nazi camp, he couldn't be there to officiate at his niece's wedding, so he wrote this homily. And I'll just quote a little bit of it here. In your love, you see only your two selves in the world. But in marriage, you are a link in the chain of generations. In your love, you see only the heaven of your own happiness. But in marriage, you are placed at a post of responsibility towards the world and mankind. Your love is your own private possession, but marriage is something more than personal. It is a status, an office. Your marriage is not for you. You didn't get married just because you want to have fun, just because you were in love with each other. Hopefully there is love. We talked to you about this, right? It's vital that it's based on that. But it's got to be more than just that. It's got to be an ongoing commitment to say that we are married for the world, for our kids first, and out from there to serve in the world. This is why in the church, and actually in the secular realm too, right? You need witnesses to your marriage, because you're not doing this in a private room locked away. You're doing it in public because it's good for the church and it's good for society. It is a public good. And that vow is that you're going to do more than just have a nice time together, go antiquing together or whatever, right? This is it is a sacrament of service. This is a sacrament that's meant to be on mission. Your marriage is meant to bring life into the world, and we've got good examples all around us. But that life doesn't end if you don't have kids or the kids are gone, right? As a married couple, we are being sent out 2 by 2. 2 by 2. That is not on accident, right? It's not on accident that Jesus began his public ministry at a wedding. It's not an accident that the very first book of the Bible is about the wedding of Adam and Eve, or that the last book of the Bible is about the wedding supper of the Lamb. That's not an accident. Our marriage is meant to be a mission in this world. Recognize that the Lord, when you made a promise to each other, the Lord also made a covenant with you, that he cares about your marriage. He wants something great for your marriage. So as you are dealing with the small, mundane, humdrum things of your life, of how to manage your family, making decisions on schooling or finances, bring it to God. Let him work through you. This sacrament gets renewed when you strive for unity, when you drive towards being on mission together, when it's dealing with anything from a situation at work or dealing with in-laws or whatever it might be, or even that you're struggling in your marriage, lean on the sacrament that you were given. This is one of the 7. This is a big deal. Lean on that. Lean on the grace that you were given in your marriage, praying for your spouse. There is no one that has greater spiritual power in your life than your spouse. So wouldn't you ask them for intercession when you're struggling or have their need? If you're having a hard conversation with one of your kids or a difficult conversation at work or whatever it might be, know that God cares about you and your marriage, and he wants to be active in you through your marriage. And it is not your love that sustains your marriage, but rather it is the sacrament that sustains your love. That's how it works. That's how we are meant to be on mission together. And we've mentioned this before, but many, many popes, many saints have talked about how marriage, right? In Scripture, we talk about marriage being a reflection of Christ's love for the church. And the family is that icon of the Trinity, of being a love that's swept up in love with one another, that is so fruitful, it brings forth life, right? That is the dynamism that we have in our marriage. And when we are engaging that, we have no idea the power that we are unleashing, right? The human family, this is Pope Benedict, the human family is in a certain sense the icon of the Trinity because the love between its members and the fruitfulness of their love. That's what we're called to. That's what we're called to as married couples, is to bear fruit, natural and spiritual fruit in this world.
So just to review, when you're making that marriage, your marriage, the foundation of your family, you want to make your spouse your top priority and strive for unity, grow your intimacy, and then go on mission with each other. And I just want to point out to you, we have a little talk summary here in your book, with the key takeaways and then a little chart there, like husbands tend to, wives tend to, and those aren't like absolute. Of course, there's some people you might be like, well, actually, I'm more like, this or that or whatever. These are all generalities, but they're helpful so we can recognize those differences. But then the next page, there is another one of those little rating scales and a place to talk about some things you admire about your spouse. And actually, we're going to have some time for questions in a few minutes. But what I would love to see you do is just take a few minutes, just like where you're sitting right now, to fill that out and share with your spouse, and maybe look at those future date night activities, and you can circle one that you would maybe like to do with each other. But we can just give you a few minutes. We'll take a little stretch break, but also to give you some time to do that page with your spouse right now.